But guys, I wanted to take a look at the preseason at every club. So I've been trying to find some information to see what player at every single club is impressing the most this preseason. So I've got one player at every single club at the very least that is impressing the coaches and the team at their club. We're going to start at the Adelaide Crows. Josh Rachele looks like he's having one of the best preseasons he's had since joining the Crows from the draft. Matthew Nicks has labelled that Josh Rachele has had one of the best summer preseasons he's ever seen. It seems that he's had an instant response after a disappointing end of 2024. So obviously he did the celebration against Port Adelaide when he pointed at the teeth. I thought it was quite funny, but I understand why people didn't really like it. The Crows then dropped him for the final game of the season in round 24 against the Sydney Swans. And then there were a couple of other senior players that said not so great things about him, which probably wasn't the greatest look. But it does seem that Josh Rachele has responded very well to the Crows dropping him, and he's had a good preseason so far. So always had the potential, Josh Rachele. Hopefully this season he can actually live up to some of those expectations. On Brisbane, Kitty Coleman and Lincoln McCarthy seem to starting to get into team drills, signifying their progress in their preseason. So both of them missed, Coleman missed pretty much every single part of the season other than the first half of the opening round. McCarthy missed 2/3 of the season through injury. I think it was both of them were ACLs, but both of them progressing very well. Both of them sort of expected to be ready for preseason games. So that would be massive for Brisbane. Kitty Coleman, such an important defender. And Lincoln McCarthy was one of their best players up forward before he got injured last year. So hopefully both of them can return. We already see that they were able to integrate their depth last year, the Lions, and then go win the premiership. So having more depth, they're going to be a massive team. Maybe a little bit slow at the start of the season because of extra weeks of off time, because they make the grand final, but watch out for Brisbane. I don't have any concerns about them. At Carlton, Jesse Motlop is the big talking point. So according to a couple of teammates, including George Hewitt, he says that Jesse Motlop is an early standout at preseason training. He thinks that Jesse has had a really good preseason last year, but had a few injury hiccups throughout the season, but now he's come back in really good shape. So expecting him to be a standout in the early parts of the year. So they've really needed a small forward to stand up, Carlton. They've had Matt Owies, he's obviously left now. Corey Durden, Lockie Fogarty, never really been able to cement that spot. So maybe Jesse Motlop can finally lock that spot down for the Blues in their forward line, because Mackay and Curnow desperately need help up there. On Collingwood, a couple of players to talk about here. One's Finn McRae. I know a lot of people sit there and go, oh, this again. But Braden Maynard has spoke highly about his impressive performance during the match simulation for Finn McRae, but just wait and see. Who knows? He's been able to show good signs in VFL football, good signs in preseason before, but he's never been able to keep it consistent in the AFL team. So keep an eye on Finn McRae. But one I really want to talk about is Ed Allen. He played 2 games last year, building to play more football. Could be an early starter this year because Tom Mitchell seems that he may be out of the main team. He's been around the mark, Tom Mitchell, but he is a bit older now. Interested to see if they will try and implement some youth through there. Nick Dacos and Braden Maynard have spoke publicly of how impressed they have seen Allen's preseason so far. Collingwood fans, obviously, people are really looking at their experienced players and players like Dan Houston, who they brought into the club. But there are a couple of young guys, especially Ed Allen, to one to keep an eye on. On Essendon, Elijah Stardust is the big talking point at Essendon. A pretty strong performance in the match simulation for the Bombers. Definitely one to keep an eye on. A couple of years in the wilderness, I would say, Elijah Stardust. He never really been able to lock that spot in that midfield group. But I think that there's a little bit of turnover in the Essendon midfield core with Zach Merritt, Jai Caldwell, Sam Durham. Those are the main 3 we saw last year. Parrish is a little bit of injury concern from him still. So maybe Sardis could be an option going forward in the midfield for Essendon this year, and maybe playing a little bit of forward as well. But keep an eye on him because he's done pretty well at VFL level, but when he gets to the AFL, he's found a little bit lost. But seems like he's got some good talking points regarding his preseason so far. On Fremantle, we have Matt Johnson. He's looking like he's bulked up quite a bit, showing a lot more growth in his Fremantle training, which is good to see. Seems like maybe he's moving into that role that maybe Nat Fyfe is going to be voiding in the next year or two. But Caleb Sarong has given not only Matt Johnson a rap, but Neil Erasmus. They said they're both, he has said that they're both in ridiculous shape. He likes the size of those 2 to 4 year players, and it's absolutely unbelievable. They are getting quite massive now. They're really physical players as well, and they're embracing that side of the game. Fremantle are a team to watch this year. I've already said that multiple times. They've already showed how good that midfield core is of young players like Young, Brayshaw, and Sarong. So if they can bring in players like Johnson, Erasmus, we obviously talked about O'Driscoll on the channel recently, they're going to be dangerous this year. Really high hopes of Fremantle. But one player that has been talked about a lot, he's been in a lot of headlines, is the ruckman in Sean Darcy. He has stunned teammates of how much weight he has lost during the off-season and moving into the pre-season. So, dropped quite a few kilos. He's always been seen as the big brute of a ruckman, but I think it's a good sign that he's lost a bit of weight, because with Luke Jackson, he's been seen as quite an aerobic guy, obviously. So, if they can bring in a Sean Darcy who can pinch hit forward, but then can play ruck as well, adds a little bit more depth. He can get around the ground a lot more. I think he wouldn't average more than 80% of game time, Sean Darcy. If he can play more game time, that's just more positives for Fremantle, and hopefully he can. On Geelong's side, a little bit hard to see if there's any sort of young guys coming through. However, one name keeps on coming up, which is Connor O'Sullivan. Zach Guthrie has given him a huge rap this offseason. He's been quoted saying, he's going really well at being an impactful player for us for the future. He's really pushing the training standards at the moment. So that's really good to see that even though he may not make the team early, there is signs that he could have a really good VFL season. And if you saw last year with Geelong bringing in a couple of younger guys like Dempsey, Koning obviously was been around for a little bit now, but there's some younger guys coming through and not just relying on the old heads. So that's good to see on the Geelong front. The Gold Coast. Now, Leo Lombard is the big talking point as the young guy for Gold Coast moving into this pre-season, obviously the academy pick. But one player that hasn't been talked about a lot, but is setting a lot of good standards so far this pre-season, is Connor Buderick. It does seem that he's had a fantastic pre-season on the fitness side of things. He's wanted to improve on last year after only managing 8 games of football. So just keep your eye on Connor Buderick. Good defender he's shown in the past. He's had a pretty good season in 2023. Didn't really make it in his first year under Damien Hardwick. So trying to set some better standards for himself. Maybe get some good game time for him. It's going to be hard to crack into that defence this year because you've got the likes of Euland, who had a career best year last year. The Tools, obviously, he's not taking a part of. And then you've got Noble and Rioli back there. So it's going to be tough for spots, but maybe Connor Buderick can sneak in there. Another Connor is Connor Stone for the Giants. So he's been setting some good standards this pre-season. In the trade period last year, there was a lot of talk of Connor Stone potentially moving clubs at the end of the year. There was been some courting by Essendon, but he decided to sign on with the GWS Giants. He wanted to stay, and there's been a lot of talk about him potentially taking over from Harry Perryman's role. He's been quoted saying, it's not like he's got that spot locked down, but he knows that he's got to go and earn it. And there's been a lot of good talk about him from match simulations, so keep your eye on Connor Stone. The fact that the Giants really wanted to keep him shows that there's a spot for him. On Hawthorn, the big talking point from this preseason is CJ. So, Changwath Jaff. I am so sorry if I've pronounced that wrong. But anyway, he's been playing off that halfback role that he's loved on the preseason. He looks great. Definitely want to keep an eye on. Seems like his role's been changed over the last year or so, playing wing, playing halfback. But the big concern for him has been consistency and getting game time because he's been injured quite a lot. So hopefully Jaff can get through and play a lot more footy this year because he's such an exciting player for Hawthorn, especially in 2024, just wasn't able to stay on the field enough. And I think he's going to be such an important player for them this year. Now on to Melbourne. The one player I want to take a look at here is the recruit from the Brisbane Lions. Not really talked about a lot, but Harry Sharp. So he wins the 2K time trials every single year when he was at Brisbane. He's gone to Melbourne and he set the same standard, which is great to see. Now, Lockie Hunter obviously retired at the end of the year for Melbourne. So there's a spot on the wing here for Harry Sharp. Couldn't get a spot in Brisbane because they had so many great players, so much depth. We just talked about that. But there's a spot there for Harry Sharp. He's a good runner. He'll run all day. Pretty decent user of it as well. I can see this guy starting round 1. Not going to be talked about a lot by a lot of people because he's not a big name recruit. But I do think that there's some growth here for Harry Sharp. Now, North Melbourne. There's obviously been a lot of talk about the recruits like Daniel and Parker. There's been a lot of talk about the draftee, O'Sullivan, Whitlock. And then you got the players that have been around the mark and in the team throughout the last year or so, like Sheasel, Wardlaw. But a guy who hasn't been talked about a lot, but is being talked about a little bit this preseason by North Melbourne, is Ryan Hardiman. So there's been talk from Matt Forrest from, I think it's the Herald Sun. He's came out and said, so far this preseason, Hardiman has impressed and will be fighting for a spot off that half-back line for the opening parts of the season. So keep your eye on Ryan Hardiman. He did play a few games last year for the Roos. There are a lot of people fighting for those halfback spots though. But maybe if Hardiman has a good preseason, has a good match sim, has a good Amy Community Series game, maybe there's a spot for him this season. After that, at Port Adelaide, Ollie Wines looking really good so far this pre-season. I don't know if he's going to reach the heights of 2021 with his Brownlow year. I think that's a little bit past him now. But it's good to see that he's setting the standards as well, even at his age. And one player that probably a lot of people wouldn't know about, a guy named Christian Miraz. He's quite a young guy, got picked up from the draft in the 2024. He's been playing a little bit of match sim on the wing, so keep your eye on him. I don't know if he's going to get much game time. There's a lot of players fighting for spots, youth players for Port Adelaide. You got Josh Sin, Jace Burgoyne, who did play a little bit last year and obviously impressed so much in the semi-final. And then that half-back role is going to be filled by someone. I'm thinking Jace Burgoyne's got that spot locked in first. But there's a couple of guys who, want to take over from that spot from Dan Houston as well. So we just have to wait and see who takes that. But keep your eye on Christian Miraz. On Richmond, there's a lot of players to take a look at here. I've got 4. Tyler Sonsie is the first one. Got some midfield time in the match simulation, so that's good to see. Also played on the wing. Just keep your eye on him because Tyler Sonsie, he's been in and out of the team for the Tigers the last year or so. Hasn't been able to lock down a spot, but seemingly has a good preseason so far. Caleb Smith, obviously a lot of defensive player left, obviously, was Dan Rioli in the off-season, so there is a defensive spot for him. He played in the preseason match sim off of halfback, so Caleb Smith, keep your eye out for him. Sam Banks also did the same. Got a few games last year. Sam Banks didn't really light it up, so keep your eye on maybe a Sam Banks type getting that halfback role. Talked about Brown as well, potentially locking that spot down. But a big one who was impressing a lot of people is Samson Ryan. Samson Ryan came into the team a couple of years ago, basically when Jack Riewoldt was coming down towards the end of his career. Got some games, big tall guy. Looks like he's bulked up quite a bit. Was rucking up against Nankervis and held his own, so that's really good to see. I doubt that he's going to get much ruck time this year if Nankervis is fit, but I wouldn't be surprised if he plays up forward and gets some decent games. I think this guy just needs more game time, more consistency. Give him the first 5 to 10 games of the season. Say, look, you won't be dropped. Just give him some time. See if the goals come. And if they don't, then you revisit that towards the bye. On St Kilda, Darcy Wilson I've talked about quite a lot. Won the 3K time trial. I think he won it in his first year as well. So really setting the standards. He's really durable. I think he played almost every single game last year. And he's continuing to impress in this preseason for the Saints. So second preseason, I think this guy is going to be massive this year. Keep your eye on Darcy Wilson. But a couple of other players here. Mateus Filippo was everywhere in the A team for the midfield. So Mateus Filippo looks like he's a lock this year in that midfield core for the Saints. So obviously he ended last year in great form. So keep your eye out on him. And then one that hasn't been talked about a lot is Max Hall. So he played well in the A team for the Saints. Played a little bit of midfield, a little bit of forward. So keep your eye out on him. Could be a potential debutant early. On the Swans, Callum Mills looks like he's doing really well so far this preseason. Missed a lot of 2024 through injury that he did in the previous preseason. So he's ran well in the second time trial the Swans did. If you don't know, they did 2 time trials back to back. Cal Mills ran 3rd in the second time trial, showing good fitness signs for him. So hopefully he's good as a Swans fan. And Corey Warner, he ran 1st in their first run. He looks like he's showing good signs, Corey Warner. Obviously been in the shadows of his brother for quite a long time. He's shown decent forward nous at times, but just hasn't been consistent enough. So maybe this preseason is when Corey Warner can really meet, maybe somewhere to his brother's standards. I don't know if he's going to be able to hit those sort of heights, those sort of performances, but he's a different player to Chad Warner. But I think that he's a decent left footer, does well in the VFL. So if he can maybe get that to the AFL stage, I think there's a spot for him as a smaller forward for the Swans. On West Coast, I've got 2 players to take a look at here. First one is Archer Reid. So it does seem he's impressing quite a few of the West Coast teammates so far. Matt Owies, who recently joined the club, has said in an interview that players have been impressed by the second-year tool in Archer Reid. He thinks the consensus pick pre-Christmas was Archer Reid as the most impressive. He's been training well. He looks good. He's a big guy and got some good players to learn off of, like Oscar Allen and Jake Waterman. So Matt Flynn now with that injury, I don't know if it's going to keep him out of round 1, but Archer Reed definitely a player to keep an eye on. If Matt Flynn is missing round 1, wouldn't be surprised if Archer Reed gets a game. The other one I want to talk about is Bo Allen as well. So he was the top draftee for the West Coast Eagles in this year's draft. Looks like he's doing really well playing off that halfback role for the West Coast Eagles so far. Looks like he's learning a lot. I am expecting that this guy's going to be debuting round 1 for the West Coast. So just keep your eye on him. And finally, the Western Bulldogs. Joel Frazier looks like he's playing across of halfback throughout the pre-season. He ran well in their 2K time trial, I believe it was. He ran first, so played a couple of games last year, showed some decent signs, but he looks like he's having a really good preseason. So Joel Frazier looks like he may be locking down a spot for the Western Bulldogs. And Riley Sanders was impressive in the match simulation, playing the midfield majority of the time, also kicked a goal. So with a couple of players moving on at the Bulldogs in the last couple of years or so, with Arndt in front of him this year, another good preseason from Riley Sanders. I'm expecting him to get games, and I think he's definitely a part of that midfield core if they want to play him. So good to see on the Western Bulldogs front. But to quickly recap the players who are really impressing so far this preseason at your club. First of all, at the Adelaide Crows is Joshua Shelley. Brisbane is Kitty Coleman and Lincoln McCarthy. At Carlton, Jesse Motlop. Collingwood is Ed Allen. Essendon is Elijah Sardis. Fremantle is Matt Johnson, Neil Erasmus. At Geelong, it's Connor O'Sullivan. Gold Coast, Connor Butterick. GWS, Connor Stone. Hawthorn is Jaff. Melbourne is Harry Sharp. North Melbourne is Ryan Hardiman. Port Adelaide is Christian Mraz. Richmond is Tyler Sonzi, Samson Ryan. St Kilda, Darcy Wilson, Matthias Filippo, Max Hall. Sydney, Corey Warner and Cal Mills. West Coast is Archer Reed and Bo Allen. And the Bulldogs is Joel Frazier and Riley Sanders.